You think your day is bad because your Wi-Fi died during a Zoom call? Cute. Historically speaking, that's basically a spa day. Because somewhere in the grand trash fire of human history, a genius once looked at a dead chicken, a snowstorm, and his own weak immune system and said, "Yeah, this feels like science." Welcome to the glorious circus of crazy historical facts, where smart people make dumb choices, dumb people make legendary choices, and somehow everybody ends up in weird history textbooks looking like they lost a fistfight with common sense. Today, we're talking about deaths so ridiculous they sound like fake Reddit posts written by a drunk time traveler. But yes, that actually happened. We've got scientists, detectives, magicians, paranoid brothers, and one deeply overconfident guy who picked a fight with a cactus. And I promise you, the cactus has hands. Now, to kick off our buffet of bad decisions, let's start with a man whose name already sounds like breakfast. Sir Francis Bacon. And no, before you ask, he did not invent bacon. Which is tragic, honestly, because that would have been a cleaner legacy than the guy who accidentally speed-ran pneumonia with poultry. Francis Bacon was born in London in the year 1561, back when medicine was basically vibes, leeches, and some guy named Bartholomew saying, "Have you tried bleeding more?" Bacon grew up sickly, fragile, and generally built like a haunted candle with a pulse. He came from a powerful, wealthy family, which meant he had access to education, books, tutors, and probably soup served by someone with a terrifying haircut. But Bacon wasn't just some rich kid sitting around saying, "Father, fetch me another philosophy." He was genuinely obsessed with knowledge. At only 12 years old, he went to Trinity College at Cambridge, because apparently childhood wasn't stressful enough, and while he was there, he started noticing something deeply annoying about the intellectual world. A lot of the so-called smart guys of his time were sitting around debating abstract ideas like, what is the true nature of reality? And how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Meanwhile, Bacon was basically in the corner like, cool, but can we maybe test something? With evidence, like adults? That was Bacon's big thing. Practical experimentation. Observe the world. Test ideas. Gather evidence. Don't just stare at a rock and write a 12-volume fanfic about what the rock symbolizes. In the world of crazy historical facts, Bacon is important because he helped push science toward the scientific method. The idea that maybe, just maybe, facts should be based on reality instead of whatever Aristotle said while wearing a robe. And then, because history has the comedic timing of a sociopathic sitcom writer, the man famous for practical experimentation got taken out by practical experimentation. Before that, though, Bacon had a whole political career. He climbed the ladder in English government and eventually became Lord Chancellor in the year 1618, which was one of the most powerful positions in England. Basically, if the monarchy was the final boss, Bacon was the overpowered mini-boss with legal paperwork. He wanted to reform laws, simplify the court system, and drag England's legal machine out of the swamp. Unfortunately, he also did that classic politician thing where money starts appearing from places money should not appear. Bacon was accused of taking bribes, got fined, spent a short time in the Tower of London, and was booted from public office in the year 1621. Very embarrassing. Imagine getting fired from government in an age when corruption was practically a team sport. But losing political power gave Bacon more time for science, and in the year 1626, while traveling during a snowstorm, he had one of those thoughts that sound smart right up until your immune system files a complaint. He looked at the snow and thought, cold preserves food. Snow is cold. Therefore, snow could preserve meat. Honestly, not a bad idea. Refrigeration is real. Food preservation matters. This is weird history, not everything he did was stupid history. The concept was solid. The execution, however, was pure historical goblin energy. Bacon reportedly stopped his carriage, went out into the freezing weather, bought or obtained a chicken, and started stuffing it with snow to test whether cold could preserve the meat. Picture one of the founders of modern science standing in a blizzard, aggressively packing snow into a dead bird like he's preparing the world's worst Thanksgiving. Somewhere nearby, a normal person was probably watching like, "Sir Francis, are you all right?" And Bacon, shivering violently, goes, "No, but the chicken is about to be." The problem was that Bacon had always been prone to illness. So, after playing freezer technician in a snowstorm, he got sick. Then the sickness turned into pneumonia, and within a few days, Francis Bacon was dead. But here's the absurd cherry on top. According to the story, the experiment worked. The snow did help preserve the chicken. So yes, congratulations, Francis. You proved refrigeration works and then immediately became the cost of doing business. That actually happened? And that's what makes this one of the greatest crazy historical facts ever. A brilliant man helped shape modern science, challenged lazy thinking, pushed humanity toward evidence-based reasoning, and then got folded by a cold chicken side quest. History lesson number 1. Science is powerful, curiosity is noble, and if you are physically built like damp parchment, maybe don't jump into a blizzard to stuff a poultry carcass full of snow. Now, after Francis Bacon proved that chicken refrigeration can become a full-body unsubscribe from life, let's move on to a man who spent decades chasing criminals, protecting presidents, and building one of the most famous detective agencies in history, only to get bodied by the sidewalk. Mate, Allan Pinkerton. Pinkerton was born in Glasgow, Scotland, in the year 1819, which already tells you his childhood probably came with fog, poverty, and at least one angry man yelling near a horse. As a young man, he fled to the United States with very little money and started working as a cooper, which sounds fancy until you realize it means he made barrels. That was his job. Barrels. Not spy gadgets, not secret codes, not trench coats and dramatic alleyway interrogations, just wooden containers. This man was not born into detective work. He was born into, "Sir, your pickles need storage." Eventually, Pinkerton moved out into the countryside and started his own barrel-making business. And then history did that thing where a normal person accidentally stumbles into a side quest that changes their entire life. One day, while collecting wood, Pinkerton discovered a group of counterfeiters making fake money. Now, most people would see criminals in the woods and immediately choose the ancient survival technique known as leaving. But Pinkerton did not do that. Instead, he watched them. He studied them. He tracked their movements and gathered information like a 19th century Batman, except instead of a billion-dollar cave, he had barrel trauma and Scottish stubbornness. After observing the counterfeiters, he gave a detailed report to the local sheriff, and the criminals were arrested. That one moment basically lit up his brain like, wait a second, I might be good at this. And he was. By the late 1840s, Pinkerton became Chicago's first police detective. Soon after, he founded the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. A name so dramatic, it sounds like it should appear on a business card handed to you by a man hiding behind a curtain. His agency hunted train robbers, thieves, swindlers, and assorted human raccoons. In the world of weird history, Pinkerton became a major figure in early modern detective work. Then the American Civil War arrived, because apparently the nation looked at itself and said, what if we turned this argument into a nightmare with uniforms? Pinkerton supported the Union and opposed slavery. He worked as head of the Union's intelligence service and helped uncover threats against Abraham Lincoln. He even went undercover at times, which sounds cool until you remember that undercover work in the 1800s basically meant putting on a different hat and praying nobody noticed your accent. And to be fair, he was not perfect. Some of his Confederate troop estimates were wildly inaccurate, which caused problems for Union generals. So yes, Pinkerton was important, but he was not exactly a flawless Sherlock Holmes with a spreadsheet. Sometimes he was more like, "Sir, I have calculated the enemy numbers," and the numbers were just fear-wearing pants. Still, this man lived a serious life. He built an agency, worked with law enforcement, dealt with criminals, served during one of the darkest chapters in American history, and became one of those crazy historical facts you stumble across and think, wait, why did no one teach me this in school? But then comes the death. In the year 1884, Allan Pinkerton reportedly slipped while walking on the pavement, not during a shootout, not while chasing a masked train robber across a bridge, not in a dramatic final confrontation where he says, "You will never escape justice." Nope. He slipped. He fell. He hit his jaw. He bit his tongue, and the wound became infected. The infection worsened, reportedly turning gangrenous, and eventually Allan Pinkerton died. That actually happened. A man who spent his life investigating danger was defeated by the most boring environmental hazard imaginable. The sidewalk did not have a criminal record. It did not wear a disguise. It did not flee across state lines. It just sat there, flat and patient, waiting for its moment. Imagine being a legendary detective, and your final case is, who attacked me? The answer, gravity. So the lesson here is simple. You can build an empire, uncover criminals, protect presidents, and help shape the future of detective work. But if the pavement wakes up feeling petty, congratulations, you are now a cautionary tale with a beard. Now, if Allan Pinkerton getting defeated by pavement felt unfair, let's talk about a man whose entire brand was basically telling death, "Not today, bestie," and then getting taken out by the world's worst surprise ab workout. I'm talking about Harry Houdini. Even if you don't know magic, you know Houdini. The name is basically shorthand for escaping impossible situations. Locked box? Houdini. Handcuffs? Houdini. Chains? Houdini. Relationship with someone who says, "I'm fine," when they are very clearly not fine? Okay, maybe not even Houdini had that kind of power. But before he became the human cheat code for escape, Houdini was born Erich Weiss in Austria-Hungary. His family moved to the United States when he was a child, chasing a better life, which in classic immigrant history, fashion meant poverty, struggle, and enough emotional pressure to turn a kid into either a genius or a haunted violin. Young Erich eventually found performance. He worked in circus-style acts, did trapeze routines, and slowly built himself into an entertainer. Then, in the year 1891, he reinvented himself as Harry Houdini, inspired by famous magicians before him. That is already a power move. Most people change their name and become a DJ. He changed his name and became a legend. At first, things were rough. Audiences were not exactly throwing money at him like he had discovered fire, but then Houdini found his lane. Escape acts. And once he leaned into that, his career absolutely detonated. By the late 1890s and early 1900s, Houdini was performing across America and Europe. He escaped from handcuffs, ropes, crates, jail cells, locked containers, straitjackets, and water-filled tanks. If something could trap a normal person in cells, locked containers, straitjackets, and water-filled tanks, if something could trap a normal person and make them scream for their mother, Houdini looked at it like, yeah, I can turn that into rent. And that's the thing, his stunts were dangerous. Not fake, dangerous like a YouTuber eating spicy noodles and calling it trauma. Actual dangerous. He really did put himself in situations where failure could mean serious injury or death. That was the thrill. People came to watch because every show had that spicy little question floating in the air. Is tonight the night this man becomes a headline? In the world of crazy historical facts, Houdini's life is wild because he spent decades escaping from things specifically designed to kill or imprison him. But in true weird history fashion, it was not a locked box, a drowning stunt, or a steel chain that got him. It was a guy with bad timing and too much confidence. In October of 1926, Houdini was performing at the Princess Theatre in Montreal. He was already not in perfect shape. He had been dealing with pain from a previous injury, and he was resting backstage when a few students came to visit him. One of them, J. Gordon Whitehead, asked about Houdini's claim that he could withstand punches to the stomach. Now, this claim came with a pretty important hidden detail. Houdini needed to prepare his abdominal muscles first. You know, like a normal person preparing for someone to turn their torso into a punching bag. But apparently, Whitehead heard, "I can take a punch," and interpreted it as, "Please speedrun my internal organs immediately." According to witness accounts, he hit Houdini multiple times in the abdomen before Houdini had properly braced himself. Just imagine the conversation. Whitehead, "Can you really take any punch?" Houdini, "Well, if I prepare." Whitehead, "Say less." Boom, boom, boom. That is not a test. That is a Victorian-era jump scare with fists. Houdini, being Houdini, tried to tough it out. He continued performing despite severe pain because entertainers have this cursed ability to be actively dying and still say, "The show must go on." Over the next few days, his condition got worse. He developed a fever, and doctors eventually discovered that his appendix had ruptured. Infection spread through his abdomen, leading to peritonitis. And on Halloween in the year 1926, Harry Houdini died. That actually happened. The greatest escape artist in modern history escaped chains, locks, sealed containers, and water torture stunts. But he could not escape one dude treating his stomach like a carnival strength tester. So what's the lesson? If a magician says he can survive a punch, maybe wait until he finishes the sentence. Because sometimes the difference between a legendary stunt and a medical emergency is one impatient guy with main character syndrome and absolutely no chill. Now, after Houdini got taken out by the world's most poorly timed punch, let's shift into something darker. Because not every stupid death in history is cartoon funny. Some are more like, wow, human isolation is terrifying, and also maybe don't turn your house into a garbage-powered death maze. Meet Homer and Langley Collyer. The Collyer brothers were not born into disaster. They came from money. Their father was a doctor, their mother was an opera singer, and the family lived in a large brownstone house in Harlem, New York. So this was not a story that began with two weird dudes living under a bridge yelling at soup cans. These were educated, wealthy men from a respectable family. Homer studied maritime law, Langley studied chemistry and engineering, and he was also a skilled pianist. Basically, these guys had the resume of two background characters in a prestige drama who should have spent their lives sipping tea and judging other people's furniture. But then life started pulling the emergency brake. Their father died in the year 1923. Their mother died in the year 1929. After that, the brothers stayed in the family home. At first, they were just two middle-aged men living quietly. Strange, maybe, but not national cautionary tale strange. Then Homer lost his sight. Langley, deeply attached to his brother, quit his work and became Homer's caretaker, which at first sounds noble, and it was. But slowly, their world got smaller. They pulled away from society. They distrusted outsiders. They became increasingly paranoid about crime, neighbors, doctors, and basically anyone who knocked on the door without being a hallucination. As Harlem changed around them, rumors spread that the brothers had money hidden inside the house. People tried to break in, so Langley boarded up windows, sealed entrances, and started building traps throughout the home. Yes, actual traps. This was like Home Alone, except instead of a cute kid protecting Christmas, it was two reclusive adults creating a haunted escape room where the prize was tetanus. But the traps were only part of the nightmare. Inside the house, the brothers were hoarding. Not, I have too many books, hoarding. Not, my closet is messy, hoarding. Full-blown, ceiling-high mountains of newspapers, furniture, boxes, instruments, junk, garbage, and random objects packed so tightly that rooms became tunnels. The house slowly transformed from a home into a cursed storage unit with wallpaper. And remember, Homer was blind. Later, he became paralyzed from illness. Langley believed he could cure him with a diet of oranges, bread, and peanut butter because apparently medical science was too mainstream and fruit was going to reboot his eyeballs. Spoiler alert, it did not. This is one of those crazy historical facts that sounds fake because every detail keeps getting worse. Two educated brothers, a giant house, hidden tunnels, homemade traps, medical distrust, hoarding, isolation. If weird history had a basement, this story would be sitting down there in a bathrobe whispering to old newspapers. Then, in the year 1947, police received a report about a smell coming from the house. When they entered, they found an almost impossible wall of junk. It took workers hours just to move enough debris to get inside properly. Eventually, they found Homer dead. He had starved. But Langley was missing. At first, people thought Langley had run away. Maybe he had called in the tip. Maybe he had abandoned the house. But after weeks of clearing debris, workers found him too. He had been inside the whole time, crushed beneath a pile of junk after accidentally triggering one of his own traps. Without Langley, Homer had been left helpless, blind, and paralyzed, unable to get food or call for help. That actually happened. So yes, the Collyer brothers' story is absurd, but it is also brutally sad. It is a reminder that fear can shrink your entire life until your home becomes your prison. Your safety plan becomes your executioner. And your mountain of, I might need this someday, becomes the thing that buries you. And now, after the Collyer brothers turned home security into a self-owning horror movie, we arrive at what might be the purest form of historical stupidity. A man picking a fight with a cactus. Not a bear. Not a soldier. Not a corrupt king with a sword and unresolved daddy issues. A cactus. Meet David Grundman, a 27-year-old man from Arizona, who in the year 1982 looked at the desert and apparently thought, you know what this place needs? Me making worse decisions. Now, David was not a king, scientist, detective, magician, or millionaire recluse. He was just a regular guy, and honestly, that makes the story even more powerful. Because history loves famous people, but Weird History has a special little VIP lounge for ordinary people who do something so dumb, the universe stops chewing and says, wait, did he really just do that? Yes, that actually happened. David and his roommate, James, went out into the Arizona desert for recreational shooting, which, to be fair, is not unusual. When you live in a place that feels like Satan left the oven on and forgot about it, entertainment options can get limited. You either shoot cans, stare at rocks, or slowly become beef jerky with opinions. But instead of shooting at normal targets, David and James decided to shoot at a saguaro cactus. And not just any tiny little cartoon cactus sitting there like a sad green pickle. A saguaro cactus is a giant desert monument. These things can grow incredibly tall, live for well over a century, and weigh thousands of pounds. They are not plants. They are ancient desert landlords with spikes. A normal person sees a massive saguaro and thinks, wow, nature is beautiful. David apparently saw one and thought, I can take him. This is where crazy historical facts stop being educational and start sounding like a warning label for testosterone. First, David reportedly shot a smaller cactus. That went fine, because the smaller cactus was not yet old enough to legally ruin his life. Then he turned his attention to a much larger saguaro, one standing about 27 feet tall. Instead of walking away like someone with a survival instinct, he aimed at one of its huge arms and fired. And the cactus, after likely spending more than 100 years minding its own business in the desert, finally chose violence. The blast damaged one of the massive arms. That arm broke loose, fell, and came crashing down on David. The chunk reportedly weighed around 500 pounds. 500 pounds. That is not a branch. That is a refrigerator with needles and revenge issues. David was crushed and killed almost instantly. So yes, the final boss of this story was not a criminal mastermind, a war, a disease, or a tragic accident involving complicated machinery. It was a plant, a very large, very patient plant that basically said, "Congratulations, you unlocked consequences." That actually happened. And that is why this belongs in the Museum of Crazy Historical Facts. Because somewhere in Arizona, a man tried to disarm a cactus with a shotgun, and the cactus responded by inventing botanical self-defense. The lesson here is simple. Do not shoot ancient desert plants. They may not move fast, they may not speak, and they may look like background decoration in an old Western movie, but mess around long enough, and Mother Nature will drop 500 pounds of spicy green justice directly on your life choices. So what did we learn today? Francis Bacon tried to invent refrigeration and got deleted by a chicken. Allan Pinkerton helped shape detective history, then lost a street fight to pavement. Harry Houdini escaped chains, cages, tanks, and traps, but not one guy with horrible timing and aggressive fists. The Collyer brothers built a fortress against the outside world, only for the fortress to eat them alive. And David Grundman challenged a cactus to a duel, which ended exactly how nature intended. That actually happened. That is the beauty of crazy historical facts. History is not just kings, wars, treaties, and dusty portraits of men who look like they smelled terrible. Sometimes, weird history is just humanity, making choices so bad, they become immortal. So here's the lesson. Before you test science, fight gravity, trust strangers, hoard newspapers, or shoot a cactus, maybe take one deep breath and ask, do I want to become content? And if you enjoy crazy historical facts, weird history, and stories so dumb they sound illegal but that actually happened, hit that subscribe button before a houseplant decides you're next.